Thank you for joining us today. This is Pamela Passman from the Center for Responsible Enterprise and Trade. And on behalf of PwC and CREATE, welcome to our webinar today on Sports, Spies, and Hacks, Protecting Confidential Information from Malicious Insiders, Competitors, and Threats. I'm really pleased to be joined today by several colleagues from PwC as well as experts from professional sports and facilities. We're going to just go around the table, so to speak, and introduce ourselves.
The conference has been unmuted.
We'll do a self-introduction, and then we'll dive into the agenda. I'm Pamela Passman. I lead the Center for Responsible Enterprise and Trade, a global NGO that works with companies to help them implement best practices, leading practices on intellectual property protection, trade secret protection, and anti-corruption. Suzanne?
Hi, thanks, Pam. So this is Suzanne Hall. I am a managing director in our PricewaterhouseCoopers cybersecurity and privacy practice. I lead our practice here in the D.C., Washington metro area. Prior to coming to PwC and being in this role, I actually was also in industry as a CIO and a CISO, and also was the CIO for the Washington Nationals when we were opening up the new ballpark and bringing the team to D.C. I'm really excited to be here with you, Pam, and the team today to talk through what we're seeing in cybersecurity in this space, and then specifically tying it to what we've learned in sports. Chris, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Pam. Hey, Suzanne. Thanks for having us. I'm sitting here actually with Nathan Buchanan and Ben Williams, but just real quickly, I'm a director in our corporate intelligence practice, and I actually started up the sports intelligence group within PwC, looking at mitigating risk for sports franchises. I'm also a director in our enterprise physical security practice. That kind of coincides with the physical natures of the sports stadiums that we're looking at regarding the Safety Act, as well as looking at cyber aspects as well.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Williams. I'm the Director of Security and Parking for the Houston Astros. Prior to being with the Astros, I spent about 10 years in the global supply chain industry, where my focus was warehouse operations, security, and safety. In addition to that, I spent about 7 of those years working hand-in-hand with TSA and DHS for their certified cargo screening program.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nathan Buchanan. I've had about 8 years in facility and operations with several different sports franchises here locally with the Astros and Dynamo, Houston Rockets, Dallas Cowboys, and a minor league baseball team called the Sugarland Skeeters.
Pam, before we kick off real quick, I want to thank Nathan and Ben for being here and being subject matter experts and kind of what we're talking about, especially from the physical security side. I especially want to thank Ben and the Houston Astros for hosting us. We're sitting in a conference room here at the beautiful Minute Maid Park, and so I just wanted to give an extra thank you to Ben and the Astros for hosting us here.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. This is going to be a really interesting discussion. And I just want to be sure that all the participants know that they have a chat function. They can be asking questions as the presentation unfolds. You can frame it specifically for one of the 5 presenters or just throw it out and we'll figure out who should answer it. We'll be pleased to answer questions as we go through our presentation, and we are going to save some time as well at the end for additional questions. So please use your chat function. We want to hear from you. We want to be sure we're responding to the issues that you're most interested in. So today we have an ambitious agenda, framing it around cyber and insider risks. So I'm going to start off the discussion really with a big picture about the kinds of threats and vulnerabilities that sports teams, but organizations of all sizes and all sectors are facing, and why this environment has become so challenging. We're then going to hear from Suzanne on some specific issues, cyber issues, and others related to sports, but that you can then analogize for other kinds of organizations. Then we're going to hear from Chris, Ben, and Nathan, again focusing on cyber, but also talking more broadly about some of the challenges with respect to sports in particular related to security, both physical and cyber. And then we're going to circle back and summarize some steps that organizations can take to better protect themselves and mitigate against cyber and other kinds of security risks. We're going to start off, again, focused on the big picture, really understanding the cyber environment and the kinds of threats and vulnerabilities. I think a great place to frame the set of issues is with a recent report that PwC released, the Global State of Information Security Survey. This is available on the PwC website. But I think what it really shows is that the issue of data security is a very substantial issue for companies, really at all levels of the organization, whether it's the board, the C-suite, operations across a company, and business units. As the report, we just captured a few of the key data points that the survey found. 71% of data security compromises go undetected by companies. I think you're going to hear a lot from us today that in many cases it's quite some time before an organization understands and appreciates that there has been a data breach. 54% of companies have a program to identify sensitive assets. What we've seen, and I think what you'll hear today is, while half of organizations surveyed say they had some way to identify, very few actually then take the further step of categorizing and prioritizing and securing those most sensitive assets. 56% have taken the effort to inventory the collection, transmission, and storage of sensitive data. 70% expressed concern about their ability to protect intellectual property or other confidential customer data. So 30% of those who responded had some confidence in it, but most expressed a deep concern. So you've got an environment where all kinds of organizations, all sizes of organizations, representing all sectors, are quite challenged by this set of issues. We thought it might be a good place to start is really sort of reflecting on the Sony breach. And in many ways, it really was an inflection point for organizations. Again, organizations of all sizes and from all sectors. And while there were many breaches before the Sony breach, and there have been many since, and they'll continue to be, the Sony case really was an inflection point, I think, for two main reasons. The first one was the types of information, data, confidential, sensitive information, intellectual property that was misappropriated, that was released publicly, that was even destroyed in the context of this breach. On the slide, we've captured some of the information, but I think before the Sony case, most people were focused on financial data, credit card information, in some cases, some health-related data, Social Security numbers. But what the Sony case really, I think, brought home to a lot of different organizations was just this range of information that could become released. A lot of it through the release of email, but also accessing other parts of a corporate network. So you had actual, products like films and scripts released before they were expected and planned to be released. You had business plans. You had emails that talked about negotiations of contracts, and a lot of other information that was kept in email and otherwise on servers that had no intention of ever being publicly made available. You also had quite a bit of financial data, and you may recall that Sony had to delay the release of its quarterly financials because some of that information had actually been destroyed. The second reason why we think it was an inflection point for a lot of companies was just the range of employees whose data was accessed and impacted. And while this is all corporate data, the points upon which the hackers accessed the information was very, very broad. And what we hear from companies after this breach was that the employees really felt exposed. They didn't feel that their organization had protected them. They didn't feel like they knew what to do to better protect themselves and to be sure that they were avoiding this kind of intrusion. I think, as we all appreciate, a huge value of an organization is reflected in these kinds of intangible assets, intellectual property, and other proprietary confidential information and advantages. And so a company really needs to think about what is its confidential information, and within that, what are really its crown jewels? What are its most important information that it needs to be sure has the most investment in how to protect that? And we also just wanted to give you a snapshot of what we call the cyber threat landscape. Every organization's cyber threat landscape is different, but we think we've captured sort of 5 of the big threat actors and why they pursue these types of activities and the various methods that they use. I think you read most about nation states and those affiliated with nation states that are pursuing industrial and economic espionage. And the reality is that does still remain a small subset of the kinds of IP theft and the theft of confidential information. Very significant set of issues for certain sectors of the economy. Clearly in the high-tech and military technology area, that is a very significant concern. But it's really the issue of malicious insiders, and we'll hear more about this over the course of our discussion today, that represents the biggest threat. These are current and former employees. They are current and former business partners, contractors, supply chain members, and others that have had some kind of inside access to your network, to your business. The vast majority of cases in the United States represent insider cases. Again, there's a whole variety of reasons and objectives why insiders do this, whether it's a disgruntled employee or it's an employee that's been approached by a competitor or some other third party to actually pursue and try to obtain information from the employer. And we'll talk more about a variety of ways that companies need to think about how to best manage the insider threat, really understanding those employees that may be most vulnerable to third parties approaching them or may have a variety of reasons to be pursuing this illegal behavior. Competitors have always been a threat in this area and continue in the cyberspace to be a significant threat. I think what may be different today than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago was that your competitors are not just in the next state, but they are potentially in a different continent, and their ability through cyber to access your information is, of course, very significant. Organized crime is also in the space where there's an ability for financial gain. There's an ability for illicit activity. And so organized crime, as we've seen, continues to play a significant role here as well as hacktivists that pursue for social or political reasons, want to make information publicly available or want to destroy information. So these are what we have identified as the key threat actors. Malicious insiders, of course, representing the biggest threat. We've listed a whole set of methods used. You're reading a lot about social engineering, spear phishing, malware. The Target case is a great example of how a vendor's credentials were co-opted to gain access into the Target network. And there's a whole other set of physical methods also that we'll hear more about over the course of the webinar. But ultimately what we're talking about is really a failure in processes, in people, and in technology. And it is not just a set of IT issues, as we'll hear today. It really is in how you manage your people, your inside people, and those that you interact with externally, as well as the kind of business process that you have across your organization to ensure that you are identifying, prioritizing, and securing your most critical assets. So I'm now going to hand it over to Suzanne.
Thanks, Pam. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. And that was a great tee-up. I appreciate all the material that you just talked about, because I really did want to talk today a little bit about what's changed, right? You know, as I mentioned in my introduction, I've been both on the consulting side for cybersecurity, but also on the practitioner side, fighting, if you will, in the front lines of this for more years than I'm going to admit on the phone today. And what's really common in conversations that I have with other folks in cybersecurity today is that the activities and the ways that we are engaging within the businesses, and this is across industry, have significantly changed over the last couple of years. I think the Sony hack it's a great example of organizations waking up to the realities of what cyber and cybersecurity issues are today, and they do span what's, if you will, traditional. And have you touched on some of the obvious things that we all think about is what cyber criminals and cyber attacks might be looking for: credit cards, financial information, eloquent phishing techniques to execute fraud. But now we're into the organizations needing to focus on some of the unobvious, or some of the areas that perhaps they thought about from a physical security perspective, but maybe not necessarily from a cybersecurity perspective. And that's what we're seeing in some of the more recent breaches that maybe don't get as much of the headlines, but we're seeing them significantly impact organizations. And the reality is, no matter which industry you're in today, right, this is no longer just the financial services problem or the bank's problems. This is a problem for all organizations, and specifically, it is definitely a problem for sports, the leagues themselves, the teams, and the industry as a whole. Across the board, right, it's the scope of the challenge, right? It's no longer just looking at, hey, do I have good passwords on my network? Do I know where my intrusion detection is? Do I have good walls built up around my organization? It is much more about that extended enterprise. It's much more about not just you, but your close partners and your close insiders, and those that are near insiders, right? And looking at it from a much broader perspective. Looking at cybersecurity issues also from an ownership perspective. Traditionally, right, we all said, cybersecurity was the IT guy's problem, and we devolved it down to the IT. But in today's world, right, it needs to be a top-down driven conversation. It needs to be well understood by whether it's the board of directors or ownership or whomever in organizations, because the reality is the adversary that we're going up against, and from a cybersecurity perspective, are well motivated, well funded, and well prepared, and we need to recognize that and be changing how we think about cyber overall and how we align ourselves as organizations to address that. I think the other interesting aspect, and Pam, you touched upon this before as well, it's needing to identify what data is at risk. It's easy to say we've got credit cards, we maybe have some consumer information, but there's a lot of other data that organizations have that they may not be thinking about as suspect or impacted by whether it's misused credentials or an outsider or a disgruntled insider. There's a lot of other information that organizations have, and you need to take that really reflective and considerate thought to go through your organization and say, what information do I have? How could somebody either misuse that, whether it's to gain competitive advantage, to create an embarrassment for an organization, to in many ways go after an organization for revenge, right? For, you know, I was unfairly treated, or I don't feel well about certain aspects of what my organization is doing. So looking through your organization, identifying and prioritizing where that data is, and then focusing your cybersecurity program and your cybersecurity controls around protecting that data. The other key piece that I think is very different today than it was, say, 4 or 5 years ago, it's your ability to respond. Organizations that respond to a cyber attack quickly studies have shown, have a lower impact both from a perception out there in the industry, from consumers and from others, but also have a lower impact from a financial loss perspective as well. So really focusing on your ability to detect and then also respond. That's responding from a technical standpoint, responding from a media standpoint, responding from a crisis communication standpoint as well, is a huge game changer for organizations as we deal with this new reality. And then the last piece that I really want to talk about in terms of how we need to change our thinking and from cybersecurity perspective, it has to do with how we share information and how we collaborate with others. For a very long time in the cyberspace and from CISOs around the world and CIOs, you know, the idea was, you know, if I can keep the information from being public, if I can hold on to it, if I think of it as proprietary, I'm going to be in a much better position. And really, right now, with the way that the threat landscape has evolved, it's so important to be part of trusted communities and to create those trusted communities if they're not already there, to share information. Say, this is what we're seeing, this is what we're hearing. You know, I'll use an example from hospitality. You know, hospitality organizations have recently been under significant attack for rewards points. And fraudsters are trying to get access to those reward points. And the hospitality industry has started talking to each other saying, this is how they got us, or this is how we see the threat evolving. And they are able to put much more proactive steps in place to mitigate the loss and to identify and recognize when events are occurring. So those are the types of communities that are being stood up around organizations. One for definitely within the leagues. Cybersecurity is becoming a much hotter topic. Insider threat conversations are a much hotter topic at a league level. And participating from that perspective in sports or in other industries, creating those trusted networks is really a key and a game changer for organizations. So talking about the need to adapt to this new reality and talking through what organizations are doing, you know, to go back to that sort of understanding of the scope of the challenge. We talked about, you know, you need to really understand what might motivate somebody to go after certain information. It could be competitive advantage. It could be to embarrass an organization. It could be just to damage the brand. You know, it could be, you know, distributed denial of service attacks. You know, it's an oldie and goodie, but you see them going on all across the organization, just really to disrupt sales, just to disrupt the relationship between an organization and their consumers. These are the kinds of threats that you need to be looking at, both from an internal as well as an external, and in looking at that business ecosystem, right? Who are your trusted partners? What is their state of cyber? You know, if they get hacked, what does that have an impact to you as an organization? So it's no longer just saying, hey, I feel really comfortable about my program. It's really thinking about it's my program plus the organizations that are critical to my ability to deliver. You know, going on to the next area, reevaluating how owners and organizations align and create accountability for cyber inside organizations is critical. You know, we were talking, I was talking with an organization recently about other threats in the sports industry, particularly specifically in baseball, when game integrity is at risk, right? Ownership and the league jump in immediately and put in consistent and standard practices, mostly physical these days, but that same type of reaction and response is really required in this cyber world as well. And while it's great to bring in the IT guy, air quotes included, the reality is the ownership of the organization, general leadership of the organizations need to recognize that they can't turn a blind eye to cyber or just assume that the IT team has got it. They need to be thinking about it and then putting forward rules, standards, awareness programs from the top down, what's inside the organization to prevent and to really empower the organization to create that integrity and maintain that integrity of the game and of activities, whether it's sports or otherwise.
Hey, Suzanne, this is Chris.
Yeah.
Following up with that, I think one of the big issues, and I think we spoke about this earlier, was the franchises, I think, in and of itself are they're reactive. They're not really proactive out there, and I think that's what's the important issue is getting the information out there to say, hey, you know what, you need to start looking at this. You're being proactive from a physical standpoint. It needs to go hand in hand from a cyber standpoint. And I think just that aspect, that mentality from a cybersecurity initiative is just kind of in a reactive mode right now with the majority of the teams out there.
Chris, I think that's an excellent point, and one of that, just whether it's a team or whether it's another organization, right? So your cybersecurity program definitely has to be defensive, right? You have to have defenses in place, and sometimes those are reactive, but the sooner and better that you can define what you need to protect and then put those protections in place, the better. But there is a little bit, if you will, of a bleed over between detective and offense. I mean, Chris, I know you're going to talk a little bit about this as well, which is understanding the environment you're in and thinking through where those attacks might come from before they even begin. And then also leveraging whether it's social media, dark web, other areas to start to identify your threats a little bit better, makes you that much more proactive, right? And blend that defense versus offense kind of concept together.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that I will touch base on is, the teams really are looking at the malicious insiders, and and that's part of the physical security aspect and doing your part in due diligence and looking at who you're bringing in, who you're hiring, the executives you're bringing in as well, and just taking care of the franchise and the brand from that aspect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, why don't we transition to some of those more specific issues, Chris? And let me just also remind all of our participants about the chat function. If you've got any questions for individual presenters or for the presenter group as a whole, please do use your chat function and write your question to us, and we will be very pleased to respond. Ben, I'm handing it over to you. I'm sorry, Chris.
Yes, Pam.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for everyone joining. And again, I'm a director of our Sports Intelligence Group at PwC, and I just kind of wanted to touch base on risk management within the teams and the franchises and the various ways that teams that we're helping teams with their risk management. And I just kind of wanted to back up and give a little history of the Sports Intelligence Group. About 2 years ago, we started this group, and it was a kind of a offshoot of the corporate intelligence practice of what PwC has put together in the robust practice that they have, and kind of looking at, from company A doing business with company B and trying to get that leg up in the intel aspect and in the business world. And we wanted to kind of hone that scope down into an individual. What are we looking at from an individual? What are these franchises looking at from an individual standpoint? You have these companies that are spending billions upon billions of dollars either doing business, acquiring, other businesses internationally or domestically. Well, these franchises are spending millions of dollars on these individual players, and it affects the entire franchise. Yeah, you're looking at spending, multi-millions of dollars on the players, but it affects, the play of the player affects the ticket sales. It affects merchandise sales. It affects food and beverage of the stadium. So when you're investing in these players, you're investing hundreds of millions of dollars in that aspect. So what we did was we came up with kind of a concept of how we could help these franchises and looking at different ways of exploring these draft picks and really mitigating the risk of these draft picks to a certain extent. And Some of the things that you see here on this page, talent risk assessments and third-party due diligence. Taking a deep dive into what this person's background is, looking at what is taking place in his life, giving that to the franchise, let them make a determination. But this also helps in when you're doing executive hires for the franchises. Just because you're spending millions of dollars on the players themselves, you're actually spending quite a bit of money on the executives coming in. There was an incident with a sports franchise where they hired an executive and there were issues with either passwords or cyber aspects that may have hurt the franchise in a way. The other thing that we also look at is what are these players, what are these executives, who are they talking with, who are they doing business with? Are these people going to be third-party negative influences on these players, on these executives, to where it's going to affect how they run this business or how they play for this certain team? What I mean by that is if you have an individual or a player that may have a third-party negative influence that's just emotionally draining on this player, how is he going to be effective for the team? Is he going to be constantly thinking about how he's going to take care of this person, the dealings he has with this person, and instead of focusing on what his job is with the team? And it's the same thing with an executive or a coach. If a coach has a financial advisor that's just not doing what he's doing, or the hairs on the back of his neck are standing up because of the processes that he's handling his money, is a coach going to be effective in doing his job, or is he going to be more worried about what that financial advisor is doing with his money? So it's one of those things where let's protect not only the franchise, but you're protecting the brand as well. We also look at social media monitoring. One of my favorite sayings is there's no one out there on social media that's 100% perfect 100% of the time. And we use this kind of as a character building or a character analysis. It's not a full character analysis, but it gives you a good idea of the person and the character that these teams are looking at. The other thing that we look at too is if you've already drafted this person or your team that's already set, what's being said about your player, what's being said about your team, and also the threats that are coming toward that individual or toward the team. How are you going to be proactive in that, in handling any type of issues from a negative standpoint and via social media? And then the last one is really the investigations. When you have an internal conflict, or you have, if for the NFL, for instance, there was a team a few years back that had a major incident. The NFL is going to take care of themselves. The league standpoint is going to take care of themselves from an investigative standpoint. Franchises need to look at doing an internal investigations as well. Some of the teams have this capability. There's other teams that aren't set up for this. There's other leagues that aren't set up for this, for an internal investigation. So it's something that we also provide and also help not only from the league standpoint but from the team standpoint. Going into social media and the capabilities in professional sports and organizations, again, this is a really big hotbed, especially within the sports industry, in its brand reputation from the franchise standpoint when it comes to social media capabilities. One of the things that we look at from a social media standpoint, again, what are the players saying that's going to hurt the brand? What are people saying about your player? What are the threatening aspects about your player? Are people threatening the stadium that your team is playing at? What are the different aspects of social media that we can cover that you need to use to help protect the brand, help protect your fans, help protect your players, and help protect the asset that you have out there? And I'm going to pass it over to Nathan Buchanan, former Director of Security for BBVA Stadium. He's going to lightly touch base on what he used social media for in helping protect BBVA Stadium throughout his years as Director of Security.
Well, thank you, Chris. There's a couple of different ways that we use social media to conduct investigations and protect our players, cheerleaders, and our fans when they would come into the stadium. One of these specific instances was using low-tech technology. There are many companies out there that will provide social media monitoring. PwC is a great asset to use. But I was not fortunate enough to be able to have the budget allocation for that, so I ended up going with a very low-tech, just essentially a Twitter bot. I would assign, specific keywords to the individual event, and that way I would be able to get real-time alerts of social media tweets that were going out on individual games. A couple of different instances, we stopped potential field runners, because something that's become more and more popular is, if I get X amount of retweets, I'm going to run onto the field. So being able to see that proactively, I've actually gone and sat down next to the person making the tweets and advising him that that would be a very poor decision, and be happy to give him a free ride downtown and win a couple of bracelets. But the social media also applies to protecting the players and the cheerleaders that are frequently targets of stalkers or overzealous fans. So something that I would do on a regular basis is I would sit down with all the players. I would sit down with the cheerleaders and go through kind of a social media etiquette. What information to put out there and how to properly protect their own accounts. Now, whether this was, turning off, geotagging in Instagram, so when they're tweeting out pictures, it's not giving their longitude and latitude coordinate for a stalker to locate, all the way to, how do you respond to a negative fan? In this world of instant gratification, people always want to respond and have a say and think that they're being heard. There's some things that you just need to advise players on who are, human just like the rest of us. When they hear something bad about themselves, they try to defend it. Some things just aren't even worth mentioning or giving the justification that this fan was able to say something to this player and then got a response. And then with social media event threat monitoring, that was something that I kind of touched on earlier that was just huge in making sure that we could protect the integrity of the game, protect the integrity of the fans. Something that we also employed was just a text line. Many stadiums have gone to this model where you can text a identified number from a phone. SMS text comes into our command center to help report problems. Whether this was a problem fan or whether it was, somebody having a medical issue. We'd have that posted all over the stadium so fans could readily contact our command personnel so we could then respond appropriately. And then this just kind of elevates when you're doing investigations with social media, preparing for events. So when we had a big game coming up or a big match, I'd be on, social media monitoring, seeing what am I looking for? Who could be my potential threats that could be coming inside the stadium that are threatening, harm to a player, threatening harm to the stadium, or just other people that just don't support that team that they're coming for. So that event monitoring, is key to that social media aspect of professional sports, that if you don't know what's going on, you're going to be constantly reactive. And if you're in a constant reactive mode, you're always going to be behind. So we try to take that proactive approach and make sure that, we're getting ahead of these issues before they start. And, it's not a perfect science, so it's not saying that, we caught everyone, because that's just not possible. But we try to do as best that we could to, mitigate these issues before they became, real incidents.
Yeah, I think, Nate, one of the things you touched on, and I just kind of want to kind of expand on that, is talking about and using social media as an advanced tool, looking at what's being said a week prior to the event, 3 days prior to the event, looking for trends, looking for any type of anomalies within social media that may affect some sort of major event, whether it's an NBA game overseas or Major League Soccer Cup. That I think that's looking at social media real time or close to real time during an event is one aspect. But when you have a major event that you're looking at, the advanced portion of that, the advanced social media monitoring, is just as crucial as the actual game time monitoring with that. physical security threat and vulnerability assessments, one of the things that I'm also the director of our enterprise physical security practice, and one of the things that we've really been touching base on, especially working in the sports industry, is there's an initiative from the Department of Homeland Security, and it's called the Department of Homeland Security Safety Act. And in a nutshell, basically, it's liability protection against a terrorist attack in your venue if you reach this accreditation. So without getting in too much of the weeds of what this accreditation is and the process of it, basically what it does is it eliminates the liability factor for all critical infrastructure. And then since we're talking about sports, we've actually been working with a number of stadiums for the Department of Homeland Security and helping them become Safety Act accredited. It's a robust practice, and it's a robust system that these stadiums and these teams need to endure in reaching this accreditation. It's not something that's actually taken lightly. A lot of the leagues are starting to mandate that their stadiums become Safety Act accredited. The NFL has its best practices Safety Act accredited. I believe the NBA is, or they're going through their best practices to become Safety Act accredited. So it's basically a trickle-down effect from these best practices in these leagues to these stadiums to help them reach this accreditation. And there's a little extra work that these stadiums have to go through, but the thing about physical security and cybersecurity, they go hand in hand. You cannot protect the cyber aspect without the physical aspect. And the physical aspect where it really becomes important is your malicious insiders. You really don't think of doing your due diligence in risk assessments and your executives or your employees, in doing a complete holistic background check. But that's part of your physical security because you need to know who you're bringing up into your franchise and into your stadium to work on various products, various teams. Who are you bringing in for your cyber capabilities? So the aspect of the cybersecurity and the physical security actually go really hand in hand, and you really can't have one without the other. Ben Williams, who's the director of security for the Astros, is going to kind of touch base on what he's currently doing here at Minute Maid Park with physical security as well as starting the Safety Act process.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Chris. One of the things I just want to touch back on what you were saying, Chris, is what I found in the year and a half that I've been with the Astros is you don't know what you don't know. So when you have a partner like PwC helping you with the Safety Act certification, it's having that other set of eyes looking at vulnerabilities and opportunities for improvement. You will definitely get out of what you put in it, and you might not know what you don't know, and that's of course opportunity for someone else to do something that you don't want them to do in your building. Here at Minute Maid Park, home of the Houston Astros, a few of the security. The physical security devices that we have is this one that our building was built about in 2000. So our building is FEMA rated against hurricane force winds. So we have a pretty tough exterior as it is. Around the ballpark in places of vulnerability, we have these large baseball ballards to prevent cars from getting on sidewalks or trying to ram the building, with an explosive or anything. We have several interdependent systems for our security program here, one being guards. We have 24-hour guards around the building in addition to our camera system. We teamed up with a partner, Korean-based, and we've really rejuvenated what was previously here. Previously in the stadium, you would think Minute Maid Park would have these hundreds of cameras and a real Big Brother type atmosphere, but prior to 2 years ago, we were looking at maybe 60 cameras in the entire stadium, and half of them worked. Within the last 2 years, we've built that number up to about 450. We have about 1.5 petabytes of storable data we are able to use, which gives us retention on continuous record for 30 to 60 days for all those 450 cameras. In that time as well, we've added card access control to a variety of doors in the building. We have about 120 doors with access control on them, which we can link to our cameras. And then in addition to that, we have our security guards, and down at our loading dock, we installed a anti-ramming wedge, which will lift up. If you're familiar with those bank robbery movies or the ones with the government facilities where the bad guy gets out of the driveway with the poles lifting up, basically same concept, except ours is a large yellow wedge that comes up. And I've seen some instances where it has been hit and the cars do not survive. So those are a few of the layers that we have for our physical security here. And again, that's taking the time to go through the Safety Act or team up with a partner that can help you identify your places of vulnerability and opportunity is well worth it, having that extra set of eyes, because again, you may not know what you don't know.
Thanks, Ben. Just to kind of touch base, in talking about the physical security and cybersecurity, how it goes hand in hand, his card readers here at the stadium, and I've taken a tour, and thank you, Ben, for that, but taking a tour of the stadium, and one of the big things from a physical security aspect that they're doing is the card readers, but instantaneous cameras, it's spotlighting that card reader as an individual goes in and out, which helps with the protection of all their assets within the stadium. And why that's such a big issue is to reach your certification within the Department of Homeland Security, yeah, you have all these physical barriers that you need to meet, these standards that you need to meet, but there's also standards of CCTV. How are people entering your workforce, your workplace, the free access that they have? Are they being monitored? What is your communication systems like within your stadium? And then also, how are you protecting the cyber aspect within your stadium? What are your capabilities? What are you doing to prevent any type of malicious threat that may come in from a cyber aspect, from an inside entity? So a lot of that is when I say it's detailed within the Department of Homeland Security, it's very, very detailed and it's very robust, and it's something that within PwC, we're very proud that our physical security practice is Safety Act accredited, and a lot of stadiums, because of the mandate from their leagues, are reaching out and asking us to lend a hand with their Safety Act accreditation. Fixated and communicated threat assessment. This is something new that we've been working with the JBR, a joint business relationship, Theseus. And basically what this is putting together a threat actor database, going to the various leagues, going to various organizations, and finding out who the threats are to your executives, to your players, to even your workforce, and putting together a detailed database, whether it's via social media, whether it's mail, who has been constantly interrupting your practice, who has been coming in and threatening, whether it's verbally, through social media, or even physically with altercations. So this threat actor database is something that we're incorporating within our social media capabilities. Again, with Theseus, a company out of the UK, they've been very prolific at this. They've been very successful in the United Kingdom, and we've asked them to come and assist us within our social media capabilities when we're talking with sports franchises, so that we can provide a very detailed threat assessment and risk management product when we're talking about the protection of these players.
Chris, you have a question on what kind of guidance are you giving on card types and vulnerabilities?
We don't give specific advice on a certain kind of product that a system or a franchise should use. When we go through our assessment, within the stadiums in being very, very brief and kind of a 10,000-foot capability here. When we're going through, we actually look at, okay, what do you have in place that's going to deter or detract someone from entering an area that you don't want them to enter, whether it's a camera, whether it's a card reader, whether it's just a lock. What are you doing in that aspect? If the franchise or director of security asks us, hey, who do you recommend? We may give them a list of various from 5 to 10 different companies that we know that are out there, but we specifically don't get involved with, hey, you know what, use this one. They're the best ones that are out in the market. It's up to the franchise of who they want to use. Now, we'll back up with this. With regard to the Department of Homeland Security, if there are vendors out there are firms out there that have certain practices or certain technologies that are Safety Act accredited. And this is beneficial to the franchise and to the stadium itself for one big reason. If a stadium is to hire a vendor or an entity that has a Safety Act accredited technology, whether it's a CCTV, whether it's certain locks, card readers, or if it's like PwC, our practice, our physical security practice, that protection of that technology, that protection of that boutique, because of their accreditation, automatically covers the stadium from the aspect of how they're using and the operating standard of that technology. So what's nice about it, if Ben were to hire PwC to come in and do their physical assessment based on the furtherance of their Safety Act accreditation, because our practice is Safety Act accredited, our protection will trickle down to the stadium itself as they're in furtherance of their own accreditation. So there's a big benefit with stadiums going to vendors and firms that already have their Safety Act accreditation with their technologies.
Great. Thanks very much, Chris. We're getting close to the end of the hour. I just want to remind folks, if they've got questions, to please use the chat function. We're just going to really wrap up now and just think more comprehensively about how to best protect against cyber risks and the loss of confidential information, against thinking in this broader context of security overall, physical and network cyber security. What we have found, and I think what was certainly apparent during our discussion today, the ability to actually build in the management systems into your business, whether it's running a stadium, a sports team, a league, a company, whatever, and the importance of building awareness throughout your organization about the threats that you have, as well as communicating clear expectations on the behavior of your employees, your key business partners and third parties, your vendors, on how you expect them to interact with you, and being preventative and proactive in your approach, in particular in the area of cyber, understanding what is most important and how you need to protect it. And as I mentioned, overall, building this into how you operate as an organization, so that it's seamless with how your people, your processes, and your IT works. At Create and through our Create Leading Practices work, we work with companies to help build the internal business process to, in this instance, to effectively protect confidential information, whether it's your crown jewels, your trade secrets, or a broader set of confidential information. And as you see, we have 8 building blocks to do this. The importance of having policies and procedures in place, that you have folks that are responsible for embedding this throughout your business operations, what we call a cross-functional team. Understanding where your risks are. Again, we talked quite a bit about a threat landscape. The management of third parties. Many of these third parties have access to your physical presence as well as to your network. And so they need to embed those policies and procedures that you have into how they operate. We've talked about education and awareness of your employees and third parties, and the importance of monitoring. I think both Suzanne and Chris made this point. You've got to be sure that you're actually implementing and enforcing those procedures that you have in place. the importance of knowing when you have a problem. I think early in the discussion we talked about how most breaches go undetected for a long period of time. So you need to be able to identify those problems and quickly correct them. And then overall, we've talked quite a bit about security, both physical security, how that impacts on cyber and vice versa, and all these critical aspects of maintaining your most critical information. I'm going to hand it over to Suzanne for some final thoughts.
Thanks, Pam. And again, I want to thank everybody for participating on today's webinar, and a special thanks to the Houston Astros and hosting part of our team over there at Minute Maid Park. I think just to close it up here, what's really apparent is that from the area of the evolving cyber attacks and the cyber threat that's out there is that we've really reached a tipping point in the evolution of how organizations are targeted, the types of information that are at risk, and the need for organizations to respond in a much broader and cohesive way than they have in the past. I'm so happy that we had both a physical security and a cybersecurity conversation here, because they do go hand in hand, and organizations, in order to be game day ready at all times, need to be thinking very broadly about the protections they have in place, how they use information both from a defensive standpoint, but also to put sort of an offensive perspective in as well. And really anything that organizations can do to elevate the conversation to the boards of directors, to ownership, to a league level in the case of sports. The leagues historically have responded to threats to game integrity very strongly, whether it's underinflated balls to corked bats or to what have you, right? The different leagues respond, they quickly. Traditionally, they've responded decisively, and we should be seeing some of that in some of the cyber perspective coming here shortly as well.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne. Again, thanks everyone for joining us today. We'll have these slides available to those who registered, and we always appreciate your feedback, either directly to CREATE or to PwC. Thanks again to all of our presenters. Have a great day.